okay. We've had an interesting couple of weeks with Jesus speaking to people, doing things in lives, challenging thoughts, patterns, and ways of living. Even today, God is continuing to say, get off the treadmill. Would you come and rest in me? Would you let me wrap myself around you? God hasn't finished with us when it comes to the grave clothes, guys. We're still holding on to them. We're still wrapped up in them. We know that we've been called out of the grave. We know we are saved. But are we running the race the way we should be? Are we unhindered in our running of the race? Now, God spoke to us very clearly 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago maybe, about getting off those old things that hold us in the grave. But as I've been prepping for today, as I've been thinking about today's sermon, and actually saying, God, what is it you want to talk about? I felt it was along the same lines, but from a different tact almost, from a different viewpoint. You see, what God was speaking to me about is the book of Galatians. Hands up if you've ever read the book of Galatians. I have. Guys, if you haven't read it, I want to encourage you, get into it. Get into that book. Grab hold. It's only 6 chapters long. It's a really short book. And it's packed full of God. Martin Luther, the German reformer, said it's probably one of the best books in the Bible. Because it's, other than Romans, it's the one book that absolutely makes a stand against those kind of thought patterns and ideologies and theologies that say we can work our way into heaven. It's not about what we achieve, it's what we believe that matters. It's not about how hard we work, it's about how hard we believe and trust in our God. You see, I've said already today, it's Jesus plus nothing. And that's what the book of Galatians is all about. It's been called the Magna Carta of spiritual emancipation. I have no idea what that means. But you know what? It sounds so good, it's got to be recorded and it's going out there. Dan says, this is the Magna Carta of the spiritual emancipation. That sounded so holy. But you see, we sang a song just and it talked about the battle cry. Other people say that this book, the book of Galatians, is the battle cry of the Protestant reformers even. Because it's Jesus-centered. Because it's Jesus plus nothing. We may get to that place where we've ripped off the grave clothes. Where we're now walking free. We're off the treadmill and we're running. But this book tells us, Paul tells us, that there's always the opportunity. There's always that slight chance that we'll be tempted to put those grave clothes back on. To put on clothes of legalism and religion. And that's what had happened to the Galatians. They'd heard the gospel. They knew that they'd been called out of the grave. They'd been ripping off the grave clothes. And then what happens? Somebody comes along and starts feeding them extras to the gospel. Yes, it's great that you believe in Jesus, and everybody needs to believe in Jesus, but it's Jesus plus this that'll get you saved. It's Jesus plus this that'll get you through. It's Jesus plus this that'll answer all your issues. And Paul said, you foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Jesus was portrayed, crucified before you. The gospel's simple. It's Jesus. Jesus, Jesus. It's all about him. It's all for him. It's all from him. At the beginning of the book, in the first chapter, Paul's laying out his credentials almost. This is who I am. This is why I can preach this gospel. It wasn't given to me by any man. It was given to me by Jesus. I saw Jesus in a revelation, and he told me about this gospel that saves. He told me it's about him on the cross, dying, paying that price for me. It's about him coming off the cross, going into the grave. It's about him being resurrected from the grave and going to be with the Father. He said, Jesus has told me all that himself. I didn't have to go and learn it from anyone. I didn't have to go and see any of the super apostles and learn the secrets and the mysteries, because there aren't any. It's laid out bare. It's laid out plain. It's laid out simply for us. It's Jesus plus nothing. You can't work your way into heaven, but you can believe your way there. And Paul, in that first chapter, he's kind of laying out, look, you know who I was. I persecuted the Jews. I persecuted Christians. I was a Jew among all the Jews. I was better than them all. If anybody can tell you about this, it's me. Because I was a sinner, but now I'm saved. And I wasn't saved by the legalism of Judaism. I wasn't saved by the extra things, the outward appearance. You see, for those who haven't read this book, the Jews had kind of infiltrated Christianity at this point. They'd sent some people into the Galatian church who started preaching a different gospel to the one that Paul had preached. They started saying, yes, Jesus is great and Jesus died on a cross for you. But you know what? You also need to keep this law. You also need to keep this one. And for the men in the room, you're going to wince in pain in a minute, because I'm going to say a word that sends shivers down spines. Blokes, I feel your pain, don't you worry. You see, the thing that this focuses on is circumcision, and it says you need to be circumcised to be real Christians. You need to have that outward bodily appearance of that thing going on in you. And Paul says, not a chance you don't. And that's why Paul is my favourite apostle. Because Paul says no. It's faith in Jesus that saves. It's not faith in Jesus and keeping to this law, or keeping to this law, or keeping to this law. Paul even goes back and he starts to explain this from the Old Testament, and he says, you know what? When Abraham was given the covenant was the promise. It was God saying to Abraham, I will bless the nations, I will save the nations through your seed. And that was some 400 years before the law was put in place. The law, as Paul says quite clearly in chapter 2, he says the law doesn't override the promise. No, the promise overrides the law. The promise stands forever. You see, when God gives you a promise, he never breaks it. You see, in a covenant relationship, it's a promise by two people to each other. And it's not dependent upon the other person keeping the covenant for you to keep your end. It's not a contract. It's not a, if I do my bit and you do your bit, we'll stay in relationship. But if you break your bit, that frees me to break my bit. That's a contract. That's not a covenant. A covenant is when we say, I'll stay with you forever. You'll stay with me forever. You go and break whatever you want to break, but I'm not breaking what I've said. And God said, I will promise you, I'm going to make a covenant with you, Abraham, that I'm going to bless the nations through you, through your seed. He overruled everything that would come after, and to the point at which the seed of Abraham made his way onto the scene, and that seed is Jesus. So guys, we as Christians, as believers in God, as people that are walking this journey with Jesus, we are children of the promise, not children of the law. We're not bound up in law. We're not bound up in the grave clothes. We're not bound up in the do's and the don'ts. We're not trapped in all those chains of what we can eat or what we can't eat, or what we should do when there's a full moon, or the festivals of this and that and this and that. We're not bound up in any of that, because we are children of the promise. And the promise was that God would bless the nations. He would bless us. That we would know eternal life with him because of Abraham's seed, Jesus. The whole book just highlights this and cries it from the mountaintops, that it's about Jesus and Jesus only. The gospel, salvation, is Jesus plus nothing. I don't know what you are all trapped in. I don't know what's dragging around your feet, what traditions, what legal kind of ideas you have. Oh, if I'm a good person, I'll be okay, I'll get to heaven. No. You need to know Jesus. If you don't know Jesus, it doesn't matter how good you are. You'll be good because you know Jesus. But if you don't know Jesus, you can be as good as you want. You won't get to the Father. It says very clearly in the Bible, the only way to the Father is through the Son. Muhammad Ali, in about 2000 and something, had an interview, and he was asked about religion. Muhammad Ali, we all know who he is. Yeah? Boxer. Yeah. Muhammad Ali was asked, what do you think about the religions of the world? And he made some statement about, in rivers, seas, lakes, streams, they're all filled with water. Just like religions, they've all got some truth in them. And then the interviewer went on to say, so what about your personal faith? What do you believe? And he said, well, everybody's going to die. That's what I believe. Everybody's going to die. And when we get in front of God, we're going to be judged. And he's going to weigh up the good things that we've done in our life. And if they outweigh the bad things, then we'll get to be with him. That's not the faith that we have. That's not what Galatians preaches. That's not what the Bible talks about. That's not who Jesus is. He doesn't care what good things you've done in your life. If you haven't made the decision to know him, then it doesn't matter the good and the bad balance. You see, nothing we can do can balance out our sin. A dead person can't do anything, and the Bible says that we are all dead in our sins. We're dead. We can't do good works from a dead place. The wages of sin, every sin, regardless of what sin it is, doesn't matter. Whatever the sin, the wages of that sin, the cost of that sin is your life. It is death. So when Muhammad Ali gets before God and he says, I've done all these good things. You know, I've done all these charity events. And God says, but there's this sin, and there's this sin, and there's this sin. What will Muhammad Ali's response to that be? I know what my response will be. I've been washed clean by the blood of the Lamb. I know it's all about Jesus and nothing else. I walk with Jesus. And yes, I mess up. And yeah, I made a mess of it. But Jesus has cleaned me up. Because I believe in him and him alone. He is the one and only God. He is the one and only way to the Lord. There's no other way to God the Father but through the Son. He's the doorway. Ali was right. Streams and lakes and rivers and seas, they're all full of water. That's got nothing to do with God. It's got nothing to do with other religions. If they don't preach Jesus as the Son of God, if they don't preach him as the only way to get to the Father, if they don't preach him crucified on a cross, then Paul says that's another gospel and it's no gospel at all. This book of Galatians is brilliant. I'm going to encourage you again, get into it, read it. Because it's so simple. It's a simple gospel. Jesus plus nothing equals salvation. Jesus plus something, waste of time. Peter comes along in chapter 2. Peter comes along and he starts eating with the Gentiles of Galatia, and he's enjoying his time with them, he's fellowshipping with them. And these Judaizers, these Jews that have infiltrated Christianity, who are trying to get into the church, they come along. And because Peter sees them, and sees what they're talking about, what they're teaching, what they're suggesting, which is, you know, it's Jesus plus the law. He starts to back away. He slips back into an old way of thinking. And let me tell you, if Peter can slip into an old way of thinking, then so can we. Peter was a rock. He was among the first to call Jesus Lord. He was taught by God in person. He spent time with Jesus. And if he can slip, we can slip. So be on guard, people, that we don't slip back into religion. We don't slip back into legalism. We don't put those grave clothes back on that God is so graciously and mercifully taking off us. Paul opposes Peter, gives him a slap around the back of the head, says, come on, son, what are you doing? I love Paul. Paul, one of my absolute heroes in the Bible. Because he's got a level of arrogance and unteachability about him. And I'm just saying that because somebody said that about me. Said I was arrogant and unteachable. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm confident and I'm right. I did actually say that to them. I left that church quite quickly. No, God had to deal with them. Those were some of my grave clothes that God had to take off. But you see, I think Paul's great. Because he's not scared to go to somebody like Peter and say, come on, lad, that's not the gospel. This is the gospel. Let's get back to the basics. Let's get back to our foundations. It's Jesus plus nothing. So I want to encourage you, get into this book of Galatians. Let God speak to you through it. Because it speaks into everything that's been said this morning about allowing God to wrap himself around us. Sitting back and being with just Jesus. Of getting off the treadmill. You can walk as long as you want on a treadmill. You're going to go nowhere fast. And you can do as many festivals, as many rituals, as many adherences to the law as you want, but you're going to go nowhere fast. Because none of that matters. It's all about Jesus. In these last 2 weeks, I would hate for somebody to think they need to work harder to be better. That they need to work harder to get clear of all this stuff and be more loved by God. Or to work out their salvation in their good works. No. The book is clear. Jesus is clear. Salvation is all about him. It's our faith in Jesus that saves us. It's his grace. It's a gift from him that we can't earn. And we need to grab hold of that truth. I think we're going to leave it there. I don't know what you've come with today. I don't know where your thought patterns are. But I hear what God has been speaking. And I think some people need to just refocus on what's important and what the truth is. It's all about Jesus. There are a few things that we can take from this book, from the book of Galatians, and it's this. All of us can slip back into old ways of thinking. Not one of us is perfect. We all need to be on guard. We all need to keep short accounts with each other. We all need friends and family around us to give us that nudge and say, come on, Peter, you donut. That's not what the gospel is. The other thing is that we've all come from the same place. It talks about the fact that we were all sinners, saved by faith in Jesus, by the grace and the gift of God. We all start the same. Paul goes on to say there's neither Jew nor Gentile. There's neither male nor female, slave or free. It's got nothing to do with gender. It's got nothing to do with any of that. It's all about your standing with Jesus. It's all about how Jesus sees you. He doesn't look at a woman and think, oh, you're less. You're more than the man next to you. He doesn't look at the slave and think, you're less than the master. He says, no. He says, you're all equal in my sight. Every one of you is a sinner, and every one of you needs to be saved. The other thing that I take from this book is that sometimes the gospel needs to be stood up for. Sometimes, well, in fact, not sometimes, all the time. The gospel needs to be preached as it is. And we need to stand against those that would come and bring compromise, that would come and bring dilution of that, to make it more palatable to this generation, to these people that are lost. The gospel is offensive, people. Jesus is offensive. Because he says there is a black and there is a white. There is a line that you can either cross or you can stay on the one side. There is a right and there is a wrong. This postmodern thought process where everything is relevant, where this is right for me but not right for you. It's rubbish. The Bible is truth. Jesus is truth. And what he says is right. And what he says is wrong is wrong. So there are 3 lessons you can grab from this. We can all fall. We were all sinners. And we're all called to stand up for the gospel. But the core of what this book says is it's all about Jesus, nothing else, nothing less. Jesus plus nothing equals everything.